now is a regional coordinator for us. It's part-time to the tune of 6 weeks each season, 2 weeks preseason, which is the season right now, and 4 weeks postseason from the start of the seeding through the sectionals. Mike's been doing a lot of help for us for a long time anyway, so it's great to have him with us. And again, if you have any problems, you call him if you just want to say something.
And I'm real happy to be in this position, and as Ben said, I've been trying to help out over the last 5 or 6 years as much as I possibly could. My wife is real happy I'm going to get paid for it now. So if you need anything, don't hesitate to call. My contact information will be provided to everybody. Janet will send that out to everybody. And if you can't get a hold of Ben, I'll do my best to help you out. All right? Before I get started with my annual preseason, I just want everybody to be aware and to acknowledge that Oneonta boys coach Alex Branham was selected as the New York State Public High School Athletic Association boys soccer coach for last year. Nice job. His name now is advanced by the state to NFHS for regional and national consideration. But Alex does a terrific job at Oneonta, as I'm sure you're all aware. And it's about time he got recognized for it. It's a nice job. I've had a couple of questions since I got here. Well, before I do anything, Mr. Cook is wandering around taking everybody's name. Please, your name, boys coach, girls coach, what school that you're associated with, and if you can fit it in there, what level you coach, varsity, JV, or modified. And that's, well, we need to know which schools are represented here today. The questions I've been asked prior to the meeting here tonight and the other 3 meetings we were at, the big change this year is all of the sports seasons throughout the year have been shortened. And the fall sports in particular, a week was taken off the schedule so that we could start a week later, so that didn't interfere with family vacations, regents exams, work requirements, and gave everybody an extra week of the summer. That week would have been 6 practices. The state, in order to compensate for that loss of those 6 practices, changed the rules that we participate by. So it used to be each individual had to have 8 practices and each team had to have 10 practices before you could scrimmage. 8 and 6 to scrimmage, 10 and 8 to play. That's been changed. That rule has been wiped right out after 6 practices. So if you practiced yesterday and you practice every day through Saturday, those are your 6. You can go right to playing games, or you can scrimmage, but you don't have to have the 6 and 8 and 8 and 10, the requirements for the last 40 years that I've been involved. All right? And the idea was that you lost 6 practices when we moved the season a week later, but you get back 4 practices because you don't have to be involved for 10 before you can play. So really it's only a loss of 2 days. And hopefully that helps out throughout the middle of the season so we're not playing so many games in 1 week. Overtimes, I'm going to cover boys, then I'll do girls, and then if there's any questions. But they haven't changed, they're the same as they've been. Boys play 40-minute halves, girls also play 40-minute halves. In the regular season, the boys play 2 10-minute overtimes that are sudden victory. If a goal is scored in the first minute, the game's over. Girls have to play out all 20 minutes, 2 10-minute periods. In the regular season, if you're involved in a tournament and the game is still tied after the overtimes have been played, you go to penalty kicks. And I have to remind everybody, penalty kicks do not determine who wins or loses the game. Penalty kicks only decide who's going to advance to the next game in the tournament. So in the regular season, generally it's a 14 tournament, and You have 2 games on Friday and 1 game, or consolation game in the final on Saturday. So you need to have somebody in the final game. You go to penalty kicks. For your record and for seeding purposes, it's recorded as a tie. Whoever wins the penalty kicks moves on in the tournament, all right? In the postseason, boys play 2 15-minute sudden victory periods. And postseason begins with the very first sectional game. And the postseason would be the first sectional game to the state championship. So you follow the same procedure all the way through. If you're still tied after 2 15-minute sudden victory periods, penalty kicks, and that would be in every game in the postseason. You go to penalty kicks because some team has to advance. Again, it does not determine a winner and a loss. If it's the sectional championship, you're declared co-champions. If it's the state championship, you're declared co-champions. The penalty kicks only determine who moves on. In the state championship, there won't be any penalty kicks. It'll be a tie, and it'll be co-championships. For the girls, 2 10-minute periods. You have to play all 20 minutes if the game is still tied. 2 5-minute sudden victory. Goal is scored in the first minute of the first 5-minute period, game's over. If it's tied, then you go to, after the 2 5 minutes, then you go to penalty kicks, and it's the same procedure all the way through. Okay? That is as clear as I can possibly make it, I hope. It's all right. I remind everybody, an AED is necessary at the game when you play. Don't play a game if you don't know where the AED is. If you're the visiting team, the law says you have to have an AED. The leagues say that we will compensate, and the home team will provide the AED. So if you're the visiting team, your first question when you get off the bus should be, where's the AED? If the coach of the other team has a heart attack during the game and you don't know where the AED is, you can't ask. It's too late. If you can't find or have not been shown an AED that is in working order, that the school's been testing the batteries on a regular basis, there's a form they have to fill, and somebody's there to be certified to use the AED, if any of those 3 don't play the game. The AED is by law necessary. Okay? If you get sued, the question's going to be, did you have an AED? You're going to say no, and you've lost your pension, your house, and all liquid assets. They're all gone. Not to mention, the AED must have been needed, and it wasn't there to save somebody's life. And with that regard, in most of the instances that I'm aware of, that the AED has been used, it has not been for a participant or a member of the team or the coaching staff in the game. It has been for somebody in the stands, somebody walking on the track on the other side of the soccer field. It's necessary that you have the AED for everybody. If somebody's grandmother's walking on the track and goes into cardiac arrest and the AED is not available, you're going to get sued. And what are the consequences of the cardiac arrest? And that will be the fault of whoever was supposed to supply the AED, and under New York State law, that's both teams. Both teams are responsible. Both coaches are going to get sued. Uniform waivers, we're finally getting to the end. NFHS has rules. All varsity teams must comply with the NFHS rules. Varsity teams, there are no waivers. JVs, next year is the end of the JV waiver. And waivers have been offered in recognition that some school districts can't afford to buy new uniforms to satisfy the rule for NFHS. So if you're ordering uniforms, make sure you order uniforms that comply, that are within the rules. All right? Modified. Modified has a total waiver. It does not have to follow the rule. Modified, the white uniform is not necessary. A lot of modified teams, they wear the same uniform for every game, all right? The goalie jersey number, modified does not have to have it, JV and varsity have to have that. There's no waiver for the goalie jersey and the JV and varsity. Modified, it is waived, and the modified waivers are, at this point, indefinite. They're gonna last for a while. There has never been and is not a waiver on white socks. You're the away team, white socks. Follow the rule book. There's never been a waiver on socks. Concussion management, every coach has to take an online course, either through the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, or through NFHS. Every coach has to have a certificate. You take a course, you print the certificate, you take it to your athletic director, have them put it in your file, so that if somebody sues you, you can produce a certificate that you are current in concussion management and the requirements. Those certificates are good for 2 years. So if it's been more than 2 years since you took the online course, you have to take it. You have to get the certificate printed, and you have to put it someplace where it's available to the public. Referees, page 106 in the rule book, is the symptoms of possible head trauma. It's your job to know those symptoms and to know what to look for in a player on the field. If you observe players on the field that took a knock and aren't right, and there's some of those symptoms in your mind exist, it's your job to take that player, stop the game, take that player to the coach, present the player for assessment. Your job is ended. That's the end of your job. Coaches, your job then is to follow the school plan. Under New York State law, every school and education regulations, the Commissioner of Education said every school has to have a plan for determining return to play. If there's been possible head trauma and then diagnosis of concussion, follow the school plan. Whatever that plan is, each school is different. Each school has different people on their team, concussion management team. Each school has different requirements. The coach cannot say there's no head trauma. Legally, a trainer cannot say there's no head trauma. The only person who can say that there's no head trauma is the chief medical officer for each school district. And that normally is a doctor, but could be a PA in some of the smaller schools. They're the only ones who can release a player back to play. Referees, if the player you took for assessment returns to play, it's not your job to question the coach as to whether they followed their plan, but your job is to observe that player. If they continue to exhibit symptoms of possible head trauma as outlined in the rule book, stop the game and return the player to the coach for assessment. If you have to continue to do that, continue to do that. The safety of the child is most important. A coach that puts a player back on the field after they've been presented for assessment, there's no other, you're insane. There's no reason to do that. You're taking responsibility for the life of that child. And these are children, and you're the adults. If somebody thinks there's a problem, address the problem. And you address the problem by following your school's plan. Coaches and referees, you're a team in this situation. You're working together to look out for the safety of that child. And children have died on the field because of concussions and head trauma. Don't allow that to happen. Their safety is far more important than the game or the outcome of the game. And having said that, the Commissioner's regulations on return to play have changed in the last year. It used to be that a child who had been diagnosed with head trauma could not return to play for 3 days until after 3 days, they were symptom-free. So it could be as long as 2 or 3 weeks. And some concussions last 6 to 8 months. So 3 days, symptom-free, they would be allowed to return to play. The commissioner said that they do not have to be restricted. After 24 hours, the school district's chief medical officer, as well as the child's pediatrician, they may determine that the child can return to limited activity, but not return to play. So they can come to practice, they might be able to do something, but they have a plan and designate exactly what that child can and cannot do, all right? That's the only change. I remind everybody, make sure your certificate is up to date. If you're a physical education teacher, you may not take the NFHS course. That does not satisfy the commissioner's regulations. If you're a physical education teacher, you must take the CDC course. Okay? Scrimmages. I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of scrimmages this year, but if you do scrimmage, because of the shortened season, because of the ability to start play on Monday, if you do scrimmage, make sure it doesn't look anything like a game. Make sure that nobody's wearing uniforms, make sure that you're not using the scoreboard to keep score, make sure that you start play with the ball in the goalie's hands, and after every goal, you start play with the ball in the goalie's hands, make sure it does not look like a game. And the maximum number of minutes that you can play is 100 minutes. And you can divide that up into quarters, you can play thirds, halves, whatever you want, but you can't exceed, a team can't exceed 100 minutes per day. Okay? Some schools still play exceptional senior contests at the end of the season. If you're involved in that, make sure that the student has used up all their eligibility. If your team is still alive in sectionals or in state play, they have not used up their eligibility. If they participate in the exceptional senior game, their eligibility is forfeited for the rest of the year, so they won't be allowed to complete their season. So make sure that your team's season is over before you allow seniors to play in those games. Modified. Modifieds may wear helmets, but they're not required to anymore. All modified goalies must have mouthpieces, and the referee should check that. A modified goalie can't play unless they have a mouthguard. And I believe the leagues up this way, outside of STAG, do play the extended fifth quarter. If you do, and the restrictions on how many quarters or how many minutes that a player can play are waived for the goalie. The goalie can play all 5 quarters. Protests, I've gone over this several times in the last couple of years. Just keep in mind that you may not protest a referee's judgment. You pay the referee to make judgments. You may not protest what you're paying them to do. You may protest a misapplication or a misinterpretation of the rule. If there's a misunderstanding or things get heated and a mistake is made, that happens. You can protest that, but not judgment. You can't protest the ball was out of bounds or the ball wasn't out of bounds. You can't protest it was a goal or it wasn't a goal. Those are judgment. Those are up to the referee, and that's what you're paying them for. Okay? A misapplication or misinterpretation of the rule, the example I always use is a penalty kick is taken, the goalie makes a save, the ball comes back to the kicker, and the referee blows the whistle and says he can't touch the ball or she can't touch the ball twice in succession. And obviously, the goalie touched the ball in between the 2 players. That's a misinterpretation of the rule or misapplication of the rule. That can be protested. When you protest something, keep in mind, if you win the game, there's no reason to continue to protest. If it doesn't affect the outcome of the game, you're probably going to lose the protest. And if it is not a misinterpretation or misapplication of the rule, you're going to lose the protest. How do you protest? Immediately. In the official scorebook, you note the protest and the time of the protest, and notify the nearest referee that you're protesting. At a normal stoppage of play, the referees get together and discuss the protest. 99 out of 100 times, it's a correctable error. Fix it. Protest goes away. If it's something that is not fixable, it's not a correctable error. During the regular season, you're going to follow your league rules. And I'm not sure about all of the leagues. I know in STAC you have 48 hours to protest, and the league will decide to protest. In sectional play, there is to be a protest committee at every game. The protest committee would then discuss the protest during the game, and a decision will be made before the end of the game regarding the protest. And all decisions are final. And your protest can be upheld, you're right. It can be denied, you're wrong. Or it can be denied with recommendation, which means you're right, but there's nothing we can do about it at this point, and we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Okay? Hardly anybody wins a protest, so keep that in mind also. Misinterpretation, misapplication of the rule. Last year I talked about NFHS and New York State Public High School Athletic Association is allowing referees to use the Ref Talk, the technology that's available today for the referees to communicate with one another during the game. And the headsets are great, you can go ahead and use them. That's not a problem. The problem that we've noticed is that referees talking to each other forget that they need to communicate with the coaches and with the people in the stands. Use your signals and be verbal in your communication. It can't just be the two of you talking and working everything out, all right? Ref Talk is fine. The other technology that's come across our desks this summer is something called, and I'm not sure I got it right, StatVest. Basically player tracking devices that a player wears under the uniform while they're in the game. The coach can follow their pattern on the field on their iPads during the game. It also gives the coach information about pulse rates, respiration, temperature, a lot of vitals that are normal to each individual. And the coach can monitor all of that. That is not legal. That is illegal. Referees, that would violate the communication rule. The coach is not allowed to communicate electronically with the player on the field during a time when there's a stoppage of play. During halftime, the coach can certainly take their iPad out and show everybody what information they have, but it can't be garnered from those players on the field. Okay? It also violates the uniform rule, and NFHS has deemed that it violates the HIPAA laws because personal information is private. It should not be communicated in any way, shape, or form to someone outside of the individuals deemed acceptable under the HIPAA law. So that would involve them filling out a form listing everybody who could have that information. So, the bottom line is you can't use it. Don't. Okay? It's very popular with, I know with the Division I teams. The NCAA allows it, but we've been getting a lot of questions. Not so much in this area, but down Westchester and Long Island, there are teams that can afford it and want to use it. NFHS says no. New York State Public High School Athletic Association says no. Referees, last year we said that the vanishing point, we think that's a great idea. The vanishing point, you can paint on the field, stops all the encroachment, eliminates a good number of yellow cards. That's great. Just make sure that when you're on an artificial surface, that the home school is going to let you paint that surface. Okay? It says vanishing, but not so much. It can leave a stain, and it doesn't always vanish. All right, it's a good tool to use, but make sure you've got permission for the people who put the $1 million into the field. Normally, Mr. Stepanowski, who's the girls coordinator for Section 4, would be here to do his part of this. I apologize, you're going to have to listen to me do this. We did overtimes. Make sure that all of your equipment is legal. It's the referees, it's not your job to check everybody's equipment. You ask the question, you're told, yes, everybody's properly attired. If you observe something during the game, somebody gets a yellow card, all right? Coaches, make sure that everybody has NOXI-approved shin guards that are age and weight and height appropriate. Bands on the arms, earrings with Band-Aids over them, illegal. But I just had it put in yesterday, if I take it out, my ear's gonna close, don't play. It's illegal. And referees, it's a visible body piercing. Oh, the ball. Starting last year, the ball used in the game, the referees do have to inspect it. It must be stamped with an NFHS. If it's not, play the game, use the ball, notify your executive board so they can notify the school that something's wrong in the section. Okay? But each ball is supposed to have the NFHS stamp, and I know last year we had a problem with Nike, $150 balls, didn't have the stamp on it. And they were good balls. So, just keep that in mind. Referees, same thing, uniforms, if the uniform is not compliant, you still play the game, there's no penalty. You notify the school they're not in compliance, notify the section, and then board policy. Game report sheets, they're online. So each coach, we suggest once a week, go online, download the form, fill it out, send it back into the section office. Don't wait till the end of the season. If you wait till the end of the season, then that puts an enormous burden on the office staff to try to get everything done in time for the seeding meetings for sectional play. On those game report sheets, you're rating the officials. Make sure that you do that fairly. Officials don't score goals. They didn't beat you. Take a deep breath if you're the losing coach and rate the officials fairly. That's what we use in Section 4 to determine who does the postseason games and who goes on to the state tournament. If there's a yellow card or a red card during the game, both teams need to note that on your game report sheets. The opposing team, number 25, got a red card. Do your best to describe why. The opposing team, number 12, got a yellow card. Do the best to explain why. My team got a red card. Number 25, explain it. Yellow card, my team. So that way we have two coaches reporting each game. It's kind of a double check, just in case a coach forgets to report that fifth yellow card and the player that was supposed to sit out doesn't sit out the next game. Okay? The section needs to know, and it's up to both coaches to send in a game report sheet for each game. Suspended games in New York State, follow the rule book. If a game is suspended before the first half, the game is picked up where it was suspended. Referees, you're in charge of suspending the game. If you suspend a game, no fly. The executive board will tell the section or the league why, but that's it. You don't have anything else to say about the game. It's not up to you guys when they play again or who plays or whether they play or not. That's up to the leagues or the section. If it's suspended after the first half is completed, the game is over. The score stands. All right? So, 1 second to go in the first half, the game's suspended. You're going to play the 1 second in the second half. 1 second after the first half ended, the game's over. Everybody goes home. Right? And it stands. In both instances, yellow cards and red cards, in the first half and the second half, whether you play or not, do count. and are recorded and are reported. All right? Section 4, like the rest of the state, has a yellow card accumulation policy. If a player gets 5 yellow cards during the course of the season, they must sit out the next regularly scheduled game. If they get a 6th yellow card, they sit out the next regularly scheduled game, and so on. At the end of the season, the slate is wiped clean. And now, if a player gets 3 yellow cards in the postseason, they sit out the next regularly scheduled game, and 4th yellow card, the next regularly scheduled game, and so on. Back to scrimmages. If you have referees on a scrimmage, and the referees give a yellow card, that does not count towards the 5. If the referees give a red card, the rule with regarding ejection from a game for unsportsmanlike conduct is not a soccer rule. We use a red card, but it's the same rule in all of the sports that high school participated in throughout the year. It's the same rule. So a red card in a scrimmage does count, and they have to sit the next regularly scheduled game, not the next regularly scheduled scrimmage game. All right? So yellow cards in a scrimmage don't count, red cards do. The red card accumulation policy, and again, this is for all sports. If you're ejected from a game, you have to sit out the rest of that game and the next game. If you get a 2nd red card, you sit out the rest of that game and the next 2 regularly scheduled games. If for some reason you lost your mind and got 2 red cards in the same game, that's 3 games you have to sit out. 1 for the first one, 2 for the second one. If you get a 3rd red card, you have decided not to participate, either as a coach or an athlete, for a calendar year in that sport. Okay? And it's up to the referees, it's up to your board policy to determine how the information is provided to the section. We would like to know the day, that night, so that the next morning when Mr. Nelson calls the athletic director knows what's going on, and the section knows what's going on, and everybody can decide that it's correct and that somebody's going to sit out a game. Okay? On that note, if a coach is ejected from a game and there's nobody to take the coach's place, the game is over. Who can take a coach's place? It can't be the JV football coach who's sitting in the stand, comes down and says, I work for the school, so I can coach. That's not accurate. It has to be somebody who is board approved. Board approved means the school board has said that this person can coach that sport. If they said that he could coach football, football is the only sport he can coach. If they said football and basketball, those are the 2 that he can coach. But if your name has not been presented to the school board to coach soccer, the JV soccer coach can coach, the modified soccer coach can coach, the girls coach can coach. They're board approved for that sport. They also must have up-to-date first aid, CPR, AED training. Certificates must be up to date. They must have an up-to-date certificate for concussion management, and they have to be approved by the school with regards to sex abuse training, and they have to have been fingerprinted. The referee, you're not going to know if that's accurate or not. Somebody says, yeah, I'm a soccer coach, I'm ready to go. It's not up to the referees to question. Certainly, board policy, your executive board, you're going to report to them, this is what happened, this is what took place, and the board will notify the schools and the section of what took place. Okay? And then it'll be up to the leagues or the section to determine whether that game is forfeited or if it's okay to have it played. If I'm the opposing coach, I'm going to want a lot of proof before I put my children out on the field in an unsafe environment. If you know for a fact that the person is not presenting themselves in a truthful way, don't put your kids on the field. If you trust that individual, if you trust the school, if you trust the people, continue to play the game. But that's situational, that'll be right there on the field, nobody can make that judgment but you right then and there. And the officials, if nobody, to your satisfaction, presents themselves, you go home. Game's over. Okay? Sportsmanship, Mr. Nelson will have something to say about that in a minute. Mr. Stepanowski would remind everybody that trash talking is not allowed, and that includes social media. And that was a real problem last year and the year before. And it was a real problem specifically with girls' teams. They were all over each other on the internet. And it carried on to the field and in different parts of the states. It was a real problem. That's not to be tolerated. It's up to the coach to be the adult and set the tone. Lightning. Here, that's my next one. Lightning. You heard thunder? That's lightning. If you saw lightning, that's lightning. All right? 30 minutes from that point. If everybody goes to cover, 27 minutes later, you heard thunder, you saw lightning, another 30 minutes. And you repeat that over and over until everybody is satisfied that it's not a danger to walk out into a thunderstorm. All right? And that includes, and this should be the two coaches and the referees should be working together as a team again to make that determination. Now, if you're on a field with no lights and darkness is a problem, you can call the game. It should be a mutual agreement between the referees and the two coaches. It does not have to be. All right? It should be. It doesn't have to be. If the referees say, hey, we're not going to play anymore, get your cars and go home. If the coach from one team says, I'm keeping my kids on the bus, we're not coming out here again, game's over. Okay? And then it's up to the leagues or the sections to decide whether it's going to be replayed or not. Okay? And that will depend an awful lot on when it was suspended, first half or second half. Wind chill and heat indexes. Mr. Nelson has brought several copies here. There's not enough for everybody, but there's two charts. If it's too hot, if it's too cold. Obviously, too cold later in the season. Be wishing for it today. I'm sure tomorrow. Too hot, don't play. Follow the information. Follow the chart. If it's a game, it's up to the home school to be aware of the heat index and later in the season, the chill factor. It's up to the home school. If the athletic director checks the heat index and it's unsafe, the athletic director's or the athletic director's office should be saying this game is not going to be played. Now, coaches, I'm sure that you're aware that you need to let the children hydrate, and particularly in humid days like today. Make sure that you give them ample water breaks. During scrimmages and games, work with the referees, be a team. Every 15 minutes we're going to stop. We're going to stop halfway through the first half or the second half. We're going to stop and let everybody get a drink. Okay? And you decide you're going to stop for 1 minute, you're going to stop for 2 minutes, you're going to decide whether you're going to let the kids leave the field or if they have to stay on the field. But work that all out before the game, before the scrimmage. Keep the safety of the players and the children in mind, all right? Just going to set these on the chair over here. Anybody who needs or wants. I'm almost done. There is online NFHS. If you go to nfhs.org and search for coaching courses, there's a 20-minute course on heat-related illness and the management of your team. well worth looking at. And every year we put a plug in for, it's a program, it's called Anyone Can Save a Life. That's the name of the program. It used to be a CD that they gave out, now everything's online and you download it. It allows you to bring your team and get them involved in any kind of catastrophic situation that might happen during the season. You sit down with your team, you assign them tasks. Who's going to call 911? Who's going to go to the athletic office and notify the administration? Who's going to get the first aid kit? Who's going to grab the AED? Who's going to meet the EMTs when they show up? Who's going to help in any manner or situations that might develop? This has been a terrific program when it's been enacted. In the last New York State Public High School Athletic Association online magazine, there was a whole article about a physical education teacher in Pelham Central School District, and a child walking by a practice somehow got knocked down. He banged his head on the gym floor and stopped breathing. Immediately, the individuals on the team knew exactly what they had to do. The coach began CPR. Everybody else went and did their jobs. EMT got there. When they got there, they had all the vital information that they needed. The child had been revived to a certain point. They took over, and he was in the ambulance and gone to the hospital in a matter of minutes because everybody knew what they were supposed to do, and they saved his life. It is a program that works. It's a program to get your team involved. Okay? And with that, Mr. Nelson, Interscholastic Sports Coordinator for second.
What I'm going to say you've heard for the last 21 years. It's probably gotten more important each year. And Mike mentioned that you are a team, the coach and the official. And that's more and more important on how you do that each year. We have 3 logos for Section 4. 3 years ago was education through sports. That's what you are doing as a team, the officials and the coaches. You are educating the players, the student athletes that are playing the game. And the biggest difference is I was a math teacher, and I love math, but I get through teaching a course and think, how important is this? Because the behavior and how people get along with each other is probably more important than the X's and Y's of math, or the X's and O's of athletics. You know, for example, the IAC has 19 schools. That means 18 of them aren't the winners. So you better learn how to handle and work with kids and student athletes who didn't win. That's where we get in trouble. I've never, that I can remember anyway, a misconduct ejection for a winning coach. It's always usually the losing coach who gets upset. And you can disagree with each other, there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to know how to talk that disagreement with each other in a normal manner. It's not going to set a bad example for, again, for the student athlete. The second logo is victory with honor, defeat with class. Again, that's education. You're going to be defeated, at least if you coach more than 1 year. And you need to learn how to handle that and have defeat with class. Not making excuses, storming off, saying it wasn't somebody's fault or it was somebody's fault. You have to learn how to handle that and set the example for, again, the student athlete. And the last one is character counts, and that probably was a big one for math class. It's tough to teach that in math class, but you sure can teach it in athletics, and that's the difference. What I hear at league meetings are 2 things. One, language, and rough and dangerous play. And again, that requires the athlete or the coaches and the officials to handle it. You are the adults at the game. You're going to set the tone, and that's what you're there for. And advice is, if you're a coach and you allow inappropriate language during practice, why would you think you're not going to hear it in a game? So you can't allow it in practice. The same with rough and dangerous play. And from an official standpoint, if you allow it at the beginning of the game, and then all of a sudden at the end of the game you think it's time to call it, that's going to be a problem for you. So don't wait till the end of the game for either of those issues. Call it at the beginning so it sets the right tone for all. So basically that's what we're in it for. That's important that we use it as an educational tool. So good luck to coaches. Hope you have a great season. The same for officials. We hope to have some of our teams and some of our officials at the state level. And so have a great year. And now you're going to have your interpretation, right? Okay.
So I'm Don Sanford, I'm the County Board interpreter, and to piggyback before I even get into the rules interpretation, talking about being a team effort, we put out advertisements this year on behalf of the board, a request to recruit new officials, and we got 3 from our endeavor. And so with a number of coaches here, what I'm going to do right now is to challenge you to help us in terms of trying to find more recruits to replenish our ranks. There is a statewide shortage in terms of soccer officials, and I'm sure it's not even just the sport of soccer that's being impacted. And so we need help from out there as well to get people to join us in terms of officiating. I think a number of people see officials as getting beat up, whether it be by coaches or players or spectators or whatever. And one of the things I said to the officials at last week's meeting was I've had many more positive interactions with coaches and players and spectators than negative ones. And so we need to build on that in terms of trying to get new officials on board. So I challenge you to do that. So with the new 2019 soccer rule changes, hopefully I get this thing going right. So improperly equipped players, cautions are not issued for improperly equipped players. Those would be like the shirts are pulled out, etc. Those are things that are not necessarily safety concerns. If it's not immediately correctable, they are instructed to leave the field of play when the ball next ceases to be in play. The players may then be replaced. Removed players, if not replaced, may re-enter at the next dead ball only after reporting to an official who shall be satisfied that the player's equipment is in order now. Okay? Play shall not be stopped for an infringement when we talk about improper equipment, except that the referee may stop play immediately if it becomes a dangerous situation. Okay, so in this instance, we have a shoe that came off. All right, we started out proper, etc. So we have an improperly equipped player wearing legal equipment, but it's not worn legally, or it's not worn at all in this instance. Okay. Advantage signal. The official calls out play on with an underswing of one or both. So we changed it a little bit. It can be one arm to indicate that there was a foul which was observed, but it's going to go on unpenalized, all right? Because the penalizing the offending team would give an advantage to the offending team. All right, so if it's to the advantage that we not call the foul because the ball continued on up the field, possibly in a goal-scoring opportunity, we're going to acknowledge the foul by saying play on, one or both hands with an upswing, etc. If the advantage does not develop, then we're going to blow the whistle, we're going to bring the ball back to where the initial foul was, and we're going to have the indirect or direct free kick from that spot. Questions on that? Okay. Okay, so it can be play on with one or play on with both of them. We got the player grabbing a jersey, holding, etc. If it's a play on situation and you deem it's a cardable offense, you can still give the play on and give the card at a later point in time. Timeout and in. The clock shall be stopped when a substitute by the team in the league is beckoned onto the field in the final 5 minutes of the second period only. And if we're talking about girls, because they play the full 2 10s, it would also include the second period of overtime if one team is ahead. And boys, we don't have to worry about the overtime because the first goal is going to be the end of the game. Okay, so the last 5 minutes, if we have the leading team provide a substitute, the clock is going to stop. Questions?
Don,
Yes.
you're still going to, in a boys game, you're still going to stop the clock in the second overtime in the last 5 minutes.
Nobody's going to be ahead. It's sudden victory.
All right.
Okay? All right.
Will you restart, are you going to let the person?
Yep, we'll instruct, it's gonna take a lot of instruction on the part of the timers to get them on board. Okay, you need to work with them. Don't just say, turn the clock off. Okay, you need to work with the timers so that hopefully later in the season, when it's gonna count even more, okay, when sectional play starts, etc., we've got everything perfected. But this is gonna be a change, not just for the officials and the coaches, but for the timers as well.
Now,
All right. Yes.
mechanically, are we going to signal that?
Yeah, so you can chop in the clock when it crosses the line on a throw-in, etc. However you're going to do that, you need to instruct the timers. Okay? Clock shall be stopped. So this is showing 3-person mechanics in terms of the substitution. Same thing, just a different rule number. Same thing, different rule number.
So the referee is going to have to be on top of it more because maybe if you're the outside person doing the timer,
Yes.
we have to be ready to push that off and
Yes,
then
you are.
adjust the clock.
Yep. And what you may want to do is when it gets down to your 5 minutes, you happen to be close enough to the timer, remind them, stop the clock, look for a signal to restart. Okay, so the table side official is going to have to do some work, especially in the beginning of the season.
I don't think we're gonna use a signal for restart. Are we gonna just start with the way we restart? We'll instruct
Yes,
the
yes.
timers
Yes,
to
to instruct the timer.
when the game starts.
Yep.
What is the restart?
Yes.
So we would stop the clock. But then,
Right, we would stop the clock.
but the timer then
But if it's a
starts
throw-in-
properly
Right.
because they know
If it's
the
a
rule.
goal kick, we know the rule. Yes.
And then it's a throw and they know the rule.
Right.
So
Yep.
We're not gonna give a signal.
Right, we don't have to, but we can.
Well, what if we?
If it's a throw-in.
You keep saying we can, I don't like that.
If it's a throw-in and the ball's coming onto the field,
But I don't give a signal to restart the game.
you can.
What signal would I give? Seriously, I'm.
The ball crosses the line, it becomes live.
You hold your arm up and drop it.
Right, you hold your arm up and then you drop it.
Do you want me to do that on other stoppages, like when we have an injury or?
If you have an injury and if it's an indirect
I've never
card,
given a
if
signal.
it's, we're talking on a throw-in.
I know, I've never, well, you can have a throw in after an injury, try to only stop the game.
Right, but how's the timer gonna know when the ball's live? To start the
We've
clock.
instructed him that. I've never given a signal before, that's all I'm
Okay,
saying.
we don't talk about it.
I've always just yelled, start the clock.
And you can do that too. Yep. Okay? All right. On a injury, timeout, something unusual, ball becomes deflated, etc. So the game is going to be restarted different a little bit this year with a drop ball. When the ball's caused to go out of bounds by 2 opponents simultaneously, that's always been the case in terms of a drop ball. When the ball becomes deflated, we're going to restart with a drop ball. Following temporary suspension of play for an injury or an unusual situation, and the goalkeeper is not in possession of the ball. All right? So in the past, if we've had an injury, okay, and one team has been in possession of the ball, we've given them an indirect free kick from the spot where they had the ball at the time that we blow the whistle. That is not the case anymore. We're going to start with a drop ball. Okay? Unless the goalkeeper's in possession, and if the goalkeeper's in possession, then we're going to start with a indirect. Okay? When simultaneous follows the same degree, that's always been a drop ball. Yes?
Can you define
Goalkeeper possession.
Goalkeeper has the ball in possession, in their hands, trapped. There's no movement between the ground and their hands. That is possession.
So if
As
you
long as
blow
there's
the
no
whistle, then you
Okay.
have control the ball.
And they have control,
With your
with their feet. I would say they're a normal, I would say they're a field player then. Did they discuss that on TV?
Possession, yes.
I would have to look at that.
They're not possession. because-
Right, I would say they're just a normal field player at that point.
But the goalie can pull the ball back in the box
Yep,
and have possession.
yes, but the goalie can also play with the feet outside the penalty area.
Exactly.
So that's, I would say unless they have it with their hands, that we're not talking the same field. Okay? But I will definitely send an email out on that. Okay. So in 1A, we have injury. Okay, we're going to stop the clock. 1B, unless the goalkeeper's in possession. 2B, now, please be aware that this year with drop balls, it does not have to be one opponent from each team. Okay? It can be multiple players involved in a drop ball situation. The referees are not to dictate how many players and which players can participate. So the ball is dropped by an official from the waist level to the ground. Any number of players may contest a drop ball, including the goalkeepers. A referee cannot decide who may contest a drop ball or its outcome. Now, teams, if you have an injury and a team was in possession of the ball, when the referee goes to drop the ball, you can elect to not contest the drop ball so that the team that had possession before maintain possession. That's your prerogative. It's not up to the officials to make that determination. Okay? So we've all been parts of games in which we've had an injury, in which teams have to try to for safety's sake, have kicked the ball off the field, okay, by an opponent, even though it was one of their opponents that was injured, and then they deliberately threw the ball to the opposing team so that they did not lose possession. That's not something similar to the drop ball situation. That's not something that is a part of our dictation. We don't make that decision, but that's something that you can certainly do. Okay? Questions on that? So we cannot decide who could contest it, how many could contest it, etc.
Seems like a weird question, but when it says any number of players, could that be 2v1?
Yes, could be one. Could be 2 versus 1. Yes.
2v1, so I'm gonna send 2 players over versus their 1?
Yep.
And drop balls?
Could be 2 versus 2.
Any number.
Any number. Yep. You want to know the rationale behind the change? That's great, yeah. Yeah. Officials better be ready. Stand back.
Score from far away. Here.
Yep.
There'll definitely be an injury after the drop ball.
Guys, listen up. So just be aware that safety of the official and the players are going to be at stake then. All right? So try to do, if you know you're going to have a melee in there, make sure that that ball's going to be there. You're not going to be in the way. All right? Take safety into consideration. Be aware. I have no idea where this will change. I understand where they were looking at. The reason they changed it from the indirect that we used to do when the team had possession was because they were worried about the fact that we were giving possession back to a team in a goal-scoring opportunity in which they were getting an indirect free kick when we stopped for an injury. And so by taking that away from us and making it a drop ball, we're not putting one team in favor of the other in their goal-scoring area of the field. That was the idea behind the drop ball. The idea in terms of the number of players, I have no idea. But the change from the indirect free kick to the drop ball was because they